This is Dave Monk, Prairie Monk, WEFT, Champaign 94.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board.
So, this is a program that tries to introduce you to local situations that are of environmental interest and with a global interest involved, but mostly local. Just want to say that it's interesting how things work out. This last Friday, the florists gave us some lilies that were getting towards the end of their prime, but I put them outside and bless me, they were of interest to people, and none of them disappeared, which is very nice. So we'll have a picture of that. As you understand, we're on Urbana Public Television and YouTube, and we're also streamed, so you can find us. We're very interested in having you understand the prairie species. Not too many people know a good range of prairie species, so we would like to give you a chance to see what's in action in late July, August, and we'll try to talk it through radio program style, but we would like to remind you that you can go to the program afterwards on YouTube and find us there. And probably is a week before it will be up, but you will then have pictures of at least some of the plants, the ones that are prominent at the present time. This is August the 30th, so it's towards the end of the August month, and you're starting to get the grasses and the like. So later in the program, we'll deal with 3 sites that are very near to town that I'm very pleased with and would like to report on. The Gorman family had a funeral this week. The Gorman family have been dentists. Jerry was the father, and the son that passed was Charles. And I remember going to the dentist in the Gorman family some years ago. Paper salvage. I looked in the cardboard bin. We usually put A-grade paper in there too, and there were just tons of booklets, but every booklet had expected to have a 9 by 11 envelope. The envelopes had not been used, brand new. It took time to take them out of the recycle bin, which is a positive in the first place. At least these weren't going into the garbage bin. Took them out, took them to the idea store, and it was too much and not really saleable at the idea store. So I took them to a printer, and the printer was glad to have them. Probably a little bit on the side of helping to recycle a truckload of wood, and so it's always easy to get new and always a little harder to recycle. But we managed to do that, and weighed each box I put together. It was about 16 pounds, and I probably took about 15 boxes to the printer. We just wish that people who are throwing things out would think about what could happen to them and how they could be used. If those envelopes were boxed instead of being broken up and thrown in the bin. They would be much more easy to print on or utilize. And so it was interesting that they came from a charitable trust agency that probably should know better. I help the university students come to our prairies on September the 19th. We usually have a busload of people that go to Rantoul, to the Pope Prairie, and they harvest seed and pick up trash that's dumped on the little road that is there. It's an attractive nuisance, and we usually try to get some sort of vehicle that will remove the dumped material. The cemetery nearby is helpful. We've been working on teasel, but I do notice that in florist shops there is a teasel that is being sold, and that still is a bother because teasel is a very, very invasive weed, and we spend much of our lifetime getting rid of it because it has a big rosette underneath it, and that covers up the prairie and destroys the prairie's opportunity to grow, especially on tilled areas where it's soft and teasel can be involved. We're still challenged with rail trail situations, and I'm convinced that the rail trail from Whiteheath to Clinton is in serious problems with people who don't want a rail trail. It's universal. We've lost lots of rail trails because of this. There is invasion on titles that are excellent for us, but it's very invasive, and we need to do something about this. It's a constant concern. It's a constant concern legally, and it involves the public. The adjacent owners have been very decent for 30 years, but now that it's getting closer to putting a rail trail up, then there is concern, and it's the same on the rail trail between Banner and Danville. It's okay as long as the land is sitting there and it can be invaded a little bit. That's okay, but when it becomes a real trail and is utilized as such, it is very helpful to the local communities. It increases their economic base. You get a restaurant here, a bicycle shop there, an interest factor with tourists coming, and universally, the rape and mayhem syndrome, which is that used by owners that do not want public through their back lot, is not really true. Bicyclists don't ride around with a trailer that will hitch up a refrigerator or a television set. Generally speaking, there's 1,500 of these trails, and there's not a record of rape and mayhem on those trails. In fact, it is quite different. So somehow we have to get to you folk to tell you that these corridors are tremendously valuable, whether they be a rail trail without rails or a rail with trails, with rail and trail parallel, or with rail with a trail on the rail. All those three types of railroad allow the prairie that's on the usually about 100-foot wide corridor on either side. That's where we get the prairie soils and the microorganisms and the habitat that is prairie, parallel to the ballast. And you have to think about that, but you have to think about that in a leadership fashion. You have to figure that we can't all be out there at one time. So if we have the like of iHelp coming to several sites, we need leaders who know enough about prairie to say, this is Liatris, you pick that, or this is Ceanothus, you pick that, or you there's a problem here we'd like you to help solve. There's a shovel and a fence post. We need that leadership desperately, and we're begging you to come forth for September the 19th. It's a Saturday. I believe it's also the WEFT Day. And
Actually, this would be the day before. WEFT Fest is on a Sunday.
Okay. That's good. This year, they've decided to continue the process till September the 25th, which is nice. We've been able to get a few people together to do additional things. The volunteer population is willing, but we have to be kind enough to know that we have to tell them what they're doing, why, and explain it. It's exciting to them to know that they're working with a prairie that's down to 0.01% of its original nature. They need to know the moisture gradient and actually see a prairie. It's kind of exciting, but we need leaders who will stand in front of people and explain that. We'll go to Rantoul, to the Pope Prairie, but we will also go probably to Seymour and pick seed there. And both places are somewhat out of town, so you need time. The on-day period is just 3 hours, so if you take half an hour to get there, you don't have a lot of time, but it's amazing what 50 students can do in a very short time. And I think they very much appreciate it. I want to say this is, I put down a station break here. We're kind of don't have a habit of doing too many station breaks. So this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, and we're talking about local environment, and we do that regularly and to some extent ad nauseum, because we keep reminding you of situations that might be changed a little bit, but they're the sorts of things we like to look at. One of the things we'd like to look at is how does the Common Ground Food Organization fit into the north end of Champaign, and how will it relate to business and residents in that area. Okay, now I want to say something about prairie at this time of the year. I was called to Lake Park. Marcy Ridgway, who is a steward at the Lake Park Prairies. It's just a 2.5 acre prairie just south of Curtis Road, just east of Winfield Village, just west of First Street. It's owned by Lake Park Subdevelopment, which is on the south side of a little creek, and a bypass that cuts through the meander and lets excessive water run straight to the Ombra. This is an area which is about 2.5 acres with a bypass creek on one side, and so we have a little bit of wetland, a little bit of dry land, and it's very close to town, so it can be visited by your friends and relatives who may be wondering what the local ecosystem is. It's prairie, and it's very hard to find, so a site like this is good. The second site I want to take you to is Windsor Road, which didn't exist from First Street to Route 45 probably 15 years ago, and there's a little creek there too. And it was, we were asked by the developers of a road what we could do to establish vegetation on the side of the road when it was finished. the road cut under a railroad line. Now the Canadian National, then Illinois Central and Gulf. The railroad went over a permanent bridge, and the intent was to put a ring road around Champaign that would include Windsor Road going through rather than stopping at First Street. So this is a fairly new road. When a railroad has to be underpassed, it's not easy to take the railroad away and bring it back in the same place. So what usually happens is that the railroad puts in a big bend. So the railroad bed was lifted up 7 feet so vehicles could go underneath it, and moved east about 25 feet. So there's a huge bridge there. The bridge was made for 2 railroad lines. In the meantime, the second line was taken out. So it's a big bridge. Cars go underneath it. And there's an intersection at Windsor Road. At Windsor Road and 45, or Dunlop, or Neil, if you want to extend it from Champaign. That's the second site I wanted to talk about. The third site is Route 45 Savoy, where we have been doing battle with electrical grid poles that are very tall, like 100 and 120 feet high, and they required an easement of 100 feet by 100 feet in order to have huge equipment to put down a pedestal. Concrete pedestals for these poles go down sometimes 60 feet, and the drill that drills the hole may be 6 feet across. So they needed room to work. We begged that they not herbicide the area, but that they put down pallets. They have industrial pallets, and we would mow the area before the pallets went down, and hopefully the pallets would be removed and the prairie plants would grow again because they're deep-rooted. Well, there's a lot of excitement there because the prairie has come back, and most of the species that we knew were there are still there, and that's very helpful. So those 3 sites, Lake Park, Windsor Road, and the Route 45 prairie, all of which are subject to being somewhat native, but a lot of it is reconstruction prairie. The most natural is the Route 45, where the prairie still existed as a remnant. The road used to be there was two lanes wide, and then it was widened to 3 lanes, and then to 5 lanes, and much of that material either went to Lake Park or it went back onto the prairie and fixed up depauperate situations. Okay, let's start with the Lake Park. The call I got was, would you please photograph a cat that is on the trail at Lake Park? It was obvious that the cat had been attacked by a coyote, and could there be a record of that? Marcy Ridgway is a veterinarian, and she wants to advise people that if you have cats, do not leave them out at night. You're likely to lose them. The coyotes are coming to town. And so indeed I photographed that cat. It was only half a cat, 2 front legs and a head, and entrails pulled out along the corridor. And we left the cat there just in case someone would want to identify their pet. The following day, the rest of the body disappeared, and it was probably also a coyote that took it. So that got me into the prairie. So while I was there, I took my camera and photographed the plants that you might encounter. So When you go on a monkeying tour, you're going to encounter things in order and out of order. We're not going to approach you with a very strict plan for what we're doing. So I'll just wander you along as I would photograph on the trail at Lake Park. First, we need to give you a long shot of a trail that's mowed regularly by Lake Park, and it's about 5 feet wide, enough for two people to walk together, and the plants sort of fall over the trail some, which is rather nice as far as I'm concerned, because you get the feeling of what is cordgrass, how does it feel, how does it impinge on the sound. If I sit someone down there in a bunch of cordgrass, they're not going to hear the train that's coming by half a mile away. So long shot, medium shot, then species. And some of the species that I took photographs of included culver's root. And we're thinking about prairie and its future. In perhaps 500 years' time, we may need a biochemical out of these plants. Culver's root is obviously a plant that has been utilized for a biochemical, and probably the name is after Dr. Culver. I'm not sure about that, but that's the sort of thing that happens. You get named after the species that you worked with. We also have things like quinine, which has an ingredient that is helpful with malaria. But in the future, we do not know what we might need, and if we destroy our prairies altogether, we won't have the advantage of the endangered plant, which then became extinct. So I took a photograph of culver's root. There's a joint grass there that's rather nice. It doesn't quite belong in east central Illinois, but it's more a western plant. There's lots of ragweed, and we've been removing the ragweed because it's getting to the time when it's a concern for allergies. And some of the ragweed can be 10 feet tall and have a stem an inch across. So you need a good weed whacker to get rid of that. But it's ready to pollinate and distribute. It's usually along edges that are fertilized or disturbed in some manner, and it's more like the habitat that ragweed would have in nature. Lead plant because its leaves look ashen, like lead. There's dock. There's a huge dock plant there. You have to know that it has a 10-foot root. It's about the size of a small person's thigh. It's not as big and as deep as compass plant, which is its counterpart or its sister or brother. But it's there, and lots of leaves. And if you put your hands on either side of the leaves, you will feel them cold, because the plant is enabling itself to be cooled by having the water evaporate, and then when you do that, you have a cooling effect. The compass plant, on the other hand, is a little more rough and tough. It takes that big elephant ear that belongs to the dock and invaginates it, so it drops off a lot of the breathing pores that are rather they're stomates that can lose the plant water, and so the leaf surface is small. And a compass plant, the leaves also face north and south, so the sunlight from the tropics doesn't burn the water out of the leaf. If the leaf is turned sideways, it doesn't get a broad trap of sun. and so it's hairy, it's resinous, and all these things enable it to survive. A good-sized compass plant on that prairie, actually, we planted one that had the top 2 feet weighed 45 pounds. So we don't know much about these plants because there's not ever been money for the study of the quality of what's in these plants. But if something happens and somebody trips upon a chemical that is needed, then we need to know more about these plants. And we certainly need to know more about them before they go extinct. You can grow most of the hardy prairie plants in restoration prairies. What we value most is remnant prairies where the soil remains and the microorganisms are there and the dynamics has been going on for 6,000 years. And there's an equilibrium there, and so you have little pockets here and there where the plant can find a niche for that particular species. So prairie is not a universal mixed prairie with 100 species. It's plots here and there, and the prairie also has its own fleas ad infinitum. Bigger fleas have lesser fleas, and so on, so on, and so on, and so on. Well, some of these plants we don't get much seed from because there's a prairie weevil that is ubiquitous, and it will cut into a flower. I went to pick up a flower that belongs to a soft sunflower, and so help me, it just fell into my hands. And there was the friendly weevil. You can recognize them because they're like a 16th of an inch long, but they have a long proboscis that can go into a seed or into a flower and roam around and destroy it. And sometimes other creeks just take advantage of that. There may be birds that come and pick up the rosin that comes out of the cut-off plant, cut-off flower, and birds will pick up insects. Just thousands of insects. It's just amazing how many insects on just a little 2.5 acre plot, how many insects there are. So it's the time of year when the grasses start to come. On some banks, on the drainage ditches there, we put little blue stem because it has a 1/4 mile of rootlets, and it helps to hold the embankment together. We also take cordgrass, which takes about 10 years to grow from seed, but we usually put in clones. We take a shovelful of roots from some place that has a lot of cordgrass, and we'll throw it into the ditch. And that helps to control erosion. And we do have erosion in that little cutoff. A cutoff is where you have a gooseneck for a meander. The gooseneck became a lake park for Lake Park's subdivision, and excessive water running off the urban corridors to the west, down towards the Umbra. The cutoff is fairly short and fairly steep, and that means the water runs fast when there's a flood or 5-inch rainfall or something like that, and it can erode. So the question there was, could prairie help to stabilize the 45-degree angle of the ditch? And we said yes, and it has grown, and those little blue stems have produced young ones and then filled in the rather skeletal soils. There's big blue stem with its turkey foot seed is out. If you take the blue stem and turn it upside down, it just looks like a turkey's foot. It's up and high. The Indian grass is out. You have to know that all these grasses, switchgrass, cordgrass, big blue stem, Indian grass, little blue stem, are wind pollinated. So when you take a photograph of their fruiting body, you can see huge, huge anthers that provide the male segment for pollen for blowing to other like species. So at the moment you can stand high above the prairie and look towards Yankee Ridge where the Ombra runs in front, and there is a yellow bloom of tall coreopsis. Tall coreopsis is a reasonably aggressive prairie plant, but it looks good, and you can discern where it is compared with something like wing stem that is like a helianthus or a sunflower, but it has a flange on its stem, and it is also fairly aggressive. So these creatures have their own dominance, and they work it out with each other, and they probably work it out with the soil and the moisture and other attributes that are good for them. If it's in a wetland, you'll have something in a wetland there. There's Liatris, there's ironweed, there's Baptisia with nice black seed pods that are wonderful for insects. And if you want to collect the seed of this legume, you have to be smart, because you have to beat off a whole bunch of insects that know that there's protein in this seed. But some of it is black and ripe at the present time. Some of it is totally green and not ready to be picked yet. That's an insurance by nature to make sure that some seed gets to be saved. If one circumstance doesn't work, then another circumstance will. It's a little bit the same with New Jersey tea, which we pick regularly. And so help me, last week, some of it was still flowering, and some of it was old enough to be harvested as seed. We have to understand that and appreciate it. This is not like harvesting all your tomatoes on one day at 1 hour when the tenderness of the tomato is ideal, and you harvest the whole plant, and you genetically have arranged for the tomato to come ripe at that particular time. That's very convenient. It's a little bit like taking teosinte, which had 60 little cobs, and having 2 cobs all at the right height for a harvester to run through it at one particular time. Nature's not like that. It's going to be variable, and that makes it hard to harvest, and it also makes it expensive for the seed. Later I'll talk a little bit about Route 150. Route 150 has been planted, and so we wonder where the seed comes from and who plants what how. So, well, I roamed around the Lake Prairie quickly. We don't have a lot of time to photograph, but it's wonderful to be there many times. So up the road to Windsor Road, First Street used to go south. It goes all the way to Arcola. It's a straight north-south road. It more or less parallels Illinois Central, or Illinois Central would have been first. But you go past the Assembly Hall, down to Curtis Road, and a little bit further on, by about half a mile, and off to the west is Lake Park. Well, we're going north right now, and we're going back toward the southern parts of the university, and we're turning left on Windsor Road, and we're looking in the distance at this railroad bridge that has been raised 7 feet and moved across 25 feet. It's quite new, and at one stage there were 7 different state or local agencies involved in this road. It's a It's a dual road and concrete, and a little stream that we used to come through it in a very meandering manner. It has been straightened, and it on that straight strip of 45-degree angle that the agencies were having trouble planting fast-growing brome grass and roadside grasses, fescues and clovers and whatnot, to establish a reasonable ambiance after the road work has been completed. Didn't work, it would erode. So I asked if we could put a prairie in there. I said yes. And how long would it take to mature? Well, give me 10 years. And at that point I realized that the brome grass and other grasses that are roadside grasses have been bred to establish themselves very quickly, in perhaps even 10 days. So we went with that, and I asked for some organic material, some prairie soil on top of the clay that was the 45-degree angle. And we planted prairie there. And I'm very pleased to walk through that prairie and see some of the plants that we planted probably 20 years ago, and they're really working now. We managed to get a sign which was at right angles to the corridor. It was sandblasted. It cost $1,000. But somebody came along later and decided that this was dangerous to have a sign that way. It should go parallel to the road. And of course, nobody sees that sign anymore. And then actually, at the moment, it has a tree growing in front of it. But there was a little plot around the sign, and it enabled people to know what was there. Right to the south, you might understand there's a university energy farm going in. It's taking solar panels, and where we had asked for 15 acres of possible prairie, with not being overly confident we would get it, but that 15 acres is now a solar farm, and it's going in. So if you wonder what all the little posts are there, you'll know that's the start of a solar farm. It's near some of these big high stanchions that towers that carry electricity. So the solar farm will feed into these facilities.
We're well into the program, so how about I jump in really, really quickly and remind folks, this is WEFT Champaign, 90.1 FM, and you're listening to the Prairie Monk. David is doing something I haven't heard you do for a while. He's going through a list of not just the various prairies that he takes care of, but the different kinds of plants that you'll see on the prairies. That means people may wonder why there are videos made of these programs. This program is a really good example of the benefit of doing a video to go along with the program, the radio program, because now after the program is over, we will take this hour of audio and we'll sit down with pictures of all of these different kinds of plants. That means if you tune into UPTV this Friday afternoon, next Friday at 1 in the afternoon, or the following Tuesday, a week from this Tuesday, at 7 in the evening, is it? I can never remember.
6 on Tuesday,
6 on Tuesday,
1 o'clock on Friday.
And 1 o'clock this coming Friday, you'll be able to see, it's not streaming there. You just see it when they broadcast it. But give us a couple of weeks, and this episode should be up on YouTube also. And that's anytime you care to, you'll be able to go to UPTV's channel, and you'll see this. Today's episode is August the 30th, and you'll be able to see the video. And again, a lot of pictures dropped in of the different kinds of plants that you hear Dave describing. He's giving you the names of Coreopsis and Liatris and little blue stem, big blue stem. I don't think we'll put a picture of the half of a cat. I think we'll skip that one. But other than that, many of the things he's talked about here, you'll see in the video. Again, a couple of weeks from now.
Well, you have to realize that the wild animals don't have any habitat out there anymore. So the habitat is in your backyard, your garden, your tree, your sky. The geese are in downtown Champaign. We have a friendly couple of geese that are talking to each other all the time and sitting on buildings and enjoying the urban landscape. So the urban people have become the habitat, the only habitat that's left. People like Jack White would say, let's get farmers to put in strips of prairie so that you do have pollinators. But some agencies are even looking at soybeans so they don't really have to have pollinators. A lot of our vegetables are pollinated, and if you're a major vegetable grower, you'll be hiring in a semi-trailer load of bumblebees or regular bees to pollinate your tomatoes or your nut crops or whatever. So back to Windsor Road, with its fire training school to the north and the solar panels to the south, and a major road with lots and lots of vehicles. I was able to park off to the side because we arranged for the little curb to be cut at one stage, so that you can bump up onto the prairie without having to bump your tires. So I parked there. It's interesting that when the 7 agencies got done with the road development, the site was assigned to Champaign for maintenance, and for a reason we don't really understand. For a long time, the prairie and the expensive prairie seed that we put in adjacent to the road has been mown back one bush hog strip about 15 feet. And this year that hasn't happened. I'm not sure whether that's because it has been realized that is valuable prairie and it need not necessarily be mown, or whether it's because the budget has said we can't mow. We can't afford that mowing. But it hasn't been mown, and the bootaloo or side oats and the other plants that are little blue stem and whatnot that have been planted close to the roadside are expressing themselves and seed. And we really appreciate that, and I hope to go to the city meeting shortly with a bunch of these pictures and hope that will not be mown again. If you look on the south side of Windsor Road going west, on your left-hand side, there is a space between the road and the energy panels, and it already is populated with prairie plants. So we would hope that would happen. There's a nice bicycle trail that goes down there, and it would be nice to have a prairie site rather than a mown territory. You go under the bridge, and you come to the corner with lights on Route 45 and Windsor Road intersection. On the south side, the Red Bison maintains a sign and a little hillside, which is also mown seemingly unnecessarily, because it's not got a visual corridor problem. It just is a neatness thing, and the plants there, the big blue stem especially, is growing quite well. If you go across the road on the north side near Arby's, there's a plot of switchgrass and other prairie plants that were established there. It was a $3,000 grant provided by the city and is much appreciated. So at that corner you can stand and look and have an idea that there's no need for excessive mowing at this place. If you climb up onto the railroad, you've got to be careful because you can get killed in this sort of situation, it's very handy for us to be there. There's a second rail that's not there, and that allows you to stand and take photographs longitudinally. You can take a photograph back towards the banner with the fire treatment or training center to the north, the energy plots to the south, and the agronomic farmland to the east, and you have to know that that corridor has generated enough fuel that it should be burned soon. We did have a director of the fire training plant who came from Oklahoma, and he knew very well that that area should be burned, and he unfortunately passed. But we need to work on the corridor and see that it is burned regularly. Otherwise, you get into the strife that you get when in the West, where ecological areas that normally burned have not been burned for a long time, and then when it gets dry, it really creates problems. So now we're standing on the bridge, and we're looking south. We're looking at this big bend where the train went 25 feet to the east and then moved back onto the main line. And prairie has been planted along the berms of the side of the railroad and on the old railroad bed. The old railroad bed is still gravel, but the prairie plants can handle that, and they're there. But there are also a lot of trees. They were mown in order to facilitate the towers that have been put in, but they're regrowing. And some of these sorts of projects need more than just volunteer involvement. They need those trees to be removed professionally. They need to be the area needs to be replanted with prairie, which was what it would have been. It's mainly trees because that area was very disturbed when they put the embankments up for the railroad. It allowed a situation where crud trees could come back in. Since the Ameren, the electrical company that put in the electrical grid, was interested in not having trees grow under the power lines and short of the power lines, they mowed it. But you need a mower on the end of a hi-ho, and in a couple of days they use like 100 gallons of gasoline, and it's tough territory. So how do we work with the public agencies, state, federal, local, to maintain this rather wonderful prairie? There are signs on it. There's an Adams sign, a billboard sign, but we have been able to negotiate a no-mow policy around that. Before the sign went up, we had planted a rather rare sunshine rose. It's a vertical rose, whereas most prairie roses are linear and on have runners that run long distance, so you can pull them up and you could run the rose roots 20 feet. This is a vertical rose, and it's been accidentally mown a number of times. So we got to the point where we are hoping that doesn't happen anymore. That means we have to have signs. Signs are expensive. Signs are devilishly hard to put in near to railroads because they tend to take their railroad ballast and replace it every so often, and the ballast is put on the railroad side, and it's very hard to dig holes to put in signs, and the signs don't last forever. So there's a sort of maintenance, and it needs people who have a knowledge of what's going on, because this is not a place for amateurs to be working. If you're going to burn this area, you have to know how to burn in small places, how to put in fire breaks, and how to not have wind blowing across to a Savoy Mall or into houses. There's always complaint about smoke. So you have to know that smoke comes from mainly the burning of the roadside species on the road edge. Most prairie plants burn fairly cleanly, but if you let brome grass and other grasses, the roadside grasses burn, they burn with a lot of smoke, and that can be dangerous. So, but that corridor pleases me a lot. I've been going to the conservation easements or the construction easements. For each pole that was put in, there is a 100-foot by 100-foot construction easement, and that's where we had a mow policy, not a herbicide policy. The roots of the plants are deep enough that they come back, and I was so pleased to waddle along that corridor and see the plants coming back into action. At the moment, there's button liatris there in profusion right around where the towers were put in. There's ditches were dug a little deep. What they did was put a drain in the existing ditch and put gravel over it so that they could move a heavy equipment in, and then they took that gravel out. Well, the ditches are a little bit big, but they're good for us because they allow us to have a wetland, and you have juncus and other sedges and the like growing in wetland. So we have a little wetland there at the moment. But there's cream-colored gentian, there's pokeweed, there's New Jersey tea, rattlesnake master, prairie clover, baptisia, silphiums, just a wonderful array. If you could only see them, and there is no road through this prairie, and that's a problem. You can't stop. There's a nice little road next to an advertising sign about a quarter of a mile south of Windsor Road, and you can go in there, but you have to walk back down the corridor, and there is just a little bit of poison ivy, which makes it not contiguous, that we need to deal with. But then the poles that came out had to have a construction easement to take those poles out, and we managed to not have the prairie in between construction easements damaged very much, and that has been doing very well. And so I'm just very pleased with that site. We need to communicate our pleasure with the headquarters of Ameren. We deal with Mr. DeFanis, who's in charge of construction easements. It's not always easy. We have insurance on these places. We don't own these either three of these sites: Lake Park, Windsor Road, and Route 45. Part of 45 is railroad. Part of it is Department of Transportation. Champaign controls the Windsor Road site. Savoy Village is somewhere involved there, especially with burning. The Lake Park site is controlled by a group of 70 houses that have an authority that has been willing to buy the prairie when it was up for sale. So we can work at the upper level, but when you get to to subcontractors and the subcontractors to subcontractors. The average person is used to putting in power poles and the like in very rough, tough areas, and they don't necessarily know the value of the prairie that they're working with underneath. They don't realize that there's an endangered species and there's so little of it left. So if you tend to step on the construction easement, you can be arrested. You can have insurance, but that doesn't really count. So you have to work from the upper echelons to the echelons that are actually turning the shovel in the soil. But it has worked pretty well, and I intend to communicate that to Amarin's headquarters, which Amarin can also herbicide your prairie if you're not very careful. You need signage, and it's just very expensive stuff. So we're encouraging you to be involved in some of this sort of stuff. When we have a day like I Help Day, we would like some of you to be around just to know what to tell people who are neophytes to prairie, sometimes out of state, sometimes out of country. And if you feel inspired, call us at 351-1911, or my cell phone is 840-1911, and we'll help you to help us to preserve the prairie. And you have to know that whatever you do here locally and towards Danville will help us to save 33 miles of prairie soil in the Monticello-Clinton area. It's time. Thank you for listening. Thank you for helping. Thank you for being interested. And this is Dave Monk, your Prairie Monk, WEFT Champaign, 90.1 on your FM dial.
And Dave on the board. As always, the views expressed on the Prairie Monk are solely those of the speakers and no one else. David, if people are interested in coming out and helping when the iHelp students are available, would you have a way for them to maybe meet you here beforehand? And you could
yes,
take them?
Absolutely.
So you could have a small cadre of 3 people or something could come along,
yes.
counting me among them, of course.
Sometimes it's handy to have independent vehicles because most of the students arrive by bus.
So if they can do it, it would be great if they brought their own cars
yes.
and they could drive up there. And this again would be driving up to Rantoul.
Sometimes they can carpool.
Yeah,
Let me give you the numbers again: 351-1911 or 840-1911 or monkdavid0@gmail.com.
And I can tell you twice now I've gone up there with David and helped to corral these undergrads, and it really is a blast being up there, having all these people doing all this great work. It's amazing how much you can accomplish with a couple of dozen students working, and just seeing the plants every year. You go back and there's something different to see, so definitely something to consider.